Will Jake finally get humbled? Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is a former world champion who has previously fought the likes of Canelo Alvarez, Danny Jacobs, and is now set to fight Jake Paul. And while his dad was a legend, Chavez Jr.'s career is definitely not panned out anywhere near the same. So how good actually is Jake Paul's next opponent?
And before we get into that, we're Punch Talk and are bringing you guys daily combat sports videos. So if you're enjoying the content, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to help support the channel. So Jake Paul has finally announced who he's going to be fighting next, and who he picked may be a bit of a controversial one, going up against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., with his father being a massive legend in the sport of boxing, one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time, if not the greatest. And although his son may have the same name, he's not quite on the same level, especially with his legacy as well. In his time, he did fight some high-level competition like Canelo Alvarez, like Danny Jacobs, and has seen some success being able to capture a WBC belt. But throughout his career, he's had many issues, including being in rehab, drinking problems, drug problems, that has led him to not taking the sport serious and being regarded by many boxing fans as sort of a disgrace in the sport. And now he's 39 years of age. He hasn't really been active, only really having one fight in the last 4 to 5 years against Uriah Hall on the Jake Paul versus Mike Perry undercard, in which he was able to win that fight via unanimous decision. But other than that, his recent fights have not been looking too good. He even lost to Anderson Silva in his own hometown, and that's someone Jake Paul has already beat now years ago. And with all those factors, it just seems like Julio's chance of winning this fight against Jake Paul, as unbelievable as it may seem regarding the record, is kind of low.
Yeah, and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is going to be fighting Jake Paul in a 10-rounder at 200 pounds. Now keep in mind, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. started his career as a pro at 130 pounds, a super featherweight. That is a 70-pound difference to where he's going to be fighting Jake Paul. Just naturally, he's a way smaller guy than Jake Paul. Jake just fought at heavyweight against Mike Tyson in whatever spectacle kind of fight that was. It wasn't really a fight, but regardless, it seems like over the years he's been getting bigger and is usually bigger than a lot of his opponents, and it seems like we're seeing that again. Also a lot younger than a lot of his opponents. It looks like we're seeing that again. This time the experience is definitely in the edge of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., but is the experience going to matter too much and play too much of a factor in this fight if Chavez Jr. has only had one fight in the last 4 years and a very lackluster performance against Uriah Hall? It's not like he put a whooping and showed why he's the boxer and Uriah Hall is the MMA fighter. No, he just kind of cruised to a decision win against a washed up Uriah Hall, who himself is 40 years old, isn't necessarily known for the greatest boxing even in the UFC. So if he's not putting the likes of Uriah Hall away, he's probably not going to put out the likes of Jake Paul away. And Jake Paul probably has the edge in power, just being so much bigger. He has the edge in the size, the youth. So is Chavez Jr. really this challenge that Jake Paul is making it out to be, saying I'm on the road to become a world champion and this is a huge step up for me? I don't really think so.
Yeah, it's just honestly hard to believe at this point in Jake Paul's career. If anything, this fight should have happened years ago. And at this point, the whole stick of saying, oh, he was a former champion and Canelo barely beat him is just kind of running old at this point. Yes, he was a former world champion, but there's so much that happened in between that to now. And of course, him being a champion at 154 pounds, which is a far cry from what they're going to be fighting at. And as well with also the factors of, again, him being in rehab, him not being active, him being 39 years old. It's just odd for Jake Paul to keep trying to sell these narratives when at this point everyone knows what the truth is. Him also trying to say that Canelo barely beat Chavez, which is just not the truth at all. Canelo pretty much schooled him for all 12 rounds. He didn't lose a round. Sure, he didn't finish him, he didn't knock him out, but Chavez Jr. really only has one stoppage loss on his record, which is to Daniel Jacobs, which he wasn't even knocked out. He just quit in the corner. So Jake making these claims, it's not very genuine. And of course, if Chavez was maybe still in his prime in which he was taking boxing serious and he was still somewhat of a contender, then it would be a crazy fight and Jake's chances would probably be very low, of course. But at this stage in Chavez's career, with all that's happened in his life and with how we saw his boxing career go downhill drastically, it's in Jake Paul's favor to win this, especially with him being active, him being the much bigger guy, and still being fairly young into his boxing career where he has some of the attributes attributes like the power, and he could definitely win this fight without even needing a stoppage, to be honest, because even Anderson Silva as well was able to beat Chavez on the cards.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to put out a guy like Chavez Jr. who has that Mexican style, walking forward, just zombie-like pressure, not necessarily the hardest hands, not necessarily having all the attributes, but like you said, he's never been knocked out. So is Jake Paul going to be the first one to do it? Probably not. It is a 10-rounder, so this is going to test Jake Paul if he can't get Chavez out of there. How does he look later on into the deeper waters? He did have a 10-rounder previously against Nate Diaz, and he went the distance there. So I don't think Jake Paul is going to knock Chavez Jr. out unless Chavez Jr. is just a complete shell of what his former self is, which is definitely possible. But even at his peak, it's not like he was some world beater or some elite level boxer. He had a world title, but that doesn't mean he was one of the best in the world by any means. Even in his prime, he was definitely criticized left and right, and it's tough when you come from that boxing lineage. Chavez Sr. being one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time and having all those expectations on you pretty much your whole life to live up to what your dad's legacy was, how great he was, and a lot of sons of professional boxers just aren't able to fill the shoes that their dads left in the boxing world. It's definitely a tough position to be in, but like you said, I just don't think Chavez Jr. is maybe even the toughest test Jake Paul has had up until this point. A couple years ago in 2022, Jake Paul took on Anderson Silva, who a year before that was coming off a win against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So for Anderson Silva to get a win in Mexico against Chavez Jr. kind of shows how that fight really wasn't close, even though it was a split decision loss for Chavez Jr. Anderson Silva, way past his prime at like 46 years old, still beat him, and then Jake went on to beat Anderson Silva in a pretty competitive fight, but edging it out with that knockdown at the end of the fight in the 8th round. One of Jake's toughest tests to date. I feel like Anderson Silva, even up until now, is Jake's probably best win in his career. Obviously, he came up short against Tommy Fury, who was his best opponent the first time he fought a real professional boxer around his age, his size, who was undefeated with a similar record to him. But Tommy had been doing it way longer. Even though Chavez is over 5 times the amount of professional experience as Jake, at this point in his career, I don't know if he's even going to be Jake's toughest challenge.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't think Chavez Jr. is enough of a jump, or really even a jump at all, for Jake Paul at this point of his career. And it feels like this might just be a brutal end to Chavez's career, honestly. Get one last payday. And going back to your point, there might be some area to give Chavez a little bit of slack. He's literally named after his father, and even his nickname is translated from Spanish to be "The Legend Continues." So there's been a lot of pressure for his entire career, him not living up to expectations, going downhill in even his own life with the personal problems he's had, really not being able to live up to his father in the public's perception in any aspects. But this could honestly be a good opportunity for Chavez to put away a guy in Jake Paul who is hated by boxing purists and boxing fans, and be one last rodeo for him to try to gain some respect from the boxing fans, to prove his worth before he probably retires very soon. And this is the absolute perfect opportunity for him.
I mean, on paper, besides maybe age, it seems like these guys are pretty equal in terms of height. In terms of weight from their last fights, Chavez Jr. fought Uriah Hall at 198 pounds, so fighting Jake Paul at 200 the year after isn't going to be a big jump for him. I guess he had one fight at this weight. But then you look at the age, the experience. There's some interesting factors going into this fight. I just don't really know if Chavez Jr. at this point in his career is going to be even a threat to a guy like Jake Paul. So let us know your thoughts in the comments down below on this fight and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.'s ability. And if you guys enjoyed, check out Jake Paul versus Chavez Jr. will not end well on screen now.